Many of us today take the image of Santa for granted. It is often thought of as a contrivance of the secular and commercial reinvention of Christmas. The origins of Santa, however, are shrouded in mystery and have spurred much debate and speculation. In our last foray into the roots of Christmas, we discussed the most probable genesis of the mirthful, magic gift-bearer, which included elements of pagan Nordic religion combined with the story of the altruistic Saint Nicholas of Myra. The modern portrayal of Santa Claus is attributed largely to the poem by Clark Clement Moore, A Visit from Saint Nicholas, or 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. This, however, does little to settle the matter, as we do not know the sources of his inspiration in writing the poem. Further obfuscation arises as legitimate doubts have been expressed as to whether Moore was the actual author. Whatever the case may be, it seems likely that the poem, as well as other works of the time that introduced Santa Claus to the modern Western world, were based on more than one folkloric source tradition, and perhaps real historical practices. In this episode, we will explore some of the lesser-known possible roots of the man in the red suit. Welcome to the Hidden Passage. Among the more fantastical theories on Santa's beginnings, perhaps the most interesting is the idea that they are actually to be found within ancient Siberian shamanism, specifically in the use of the Amanita muscaria, or fly agaric, psychedelic mushroom. This fungus was thought to have been used in shamanic rites to induce visionary trance states. According to anthropologist and university professor John Rush, quote, Santa is a modern counterpart of the shaman who consumed mind-altering plants and fungi to commune with the spirit world. A number of aspects of Santa Claus folklore and the surrounding Christmas traditions have been suggested by researchers and even some academics to be symbolic of these practices. Proponents of what we will refer to as the mushroom Santa theory contend that the Amanita muscaria, the habitat of which spans the temperate and boreal regions of the northern hemisphere, including Siberia, was harvested by shamans during the warmer months and given out as gifts during the winter solstice. They claim that because it was common for heavy snowdrifts to block the entrances to homes, the shamans would deliver sacks of mushrooms by dropping them down people's chimneys. Another version of the narrative states that the shamans themselves would enter homes through the chimneys in order to perform healing rituals. They were then rewarded with food, and so these shamans were often heavy-set in appearance. The first similarity between the Amanita muscaria and Santa that immediately stands out is the coloration of the mushroom itself, which sports a bright red cap with white dots, and these colors are, of course, the same as Santa's suit. It is alleged that the shamans would even dress in ceremonial garbs purposely made to resemble the mushroom. The ecology of this species of mushroom provides another possible connection to Christmas traditions. All fungi require shady, damp environments, and so they will often grow underneath trees. In boreal regions, this means that the mushroom will readily be found underneath pine trees. Thus, proponents of this theory suggest that this is the origin of the Christmas tree, and the placing of gifts underneath, often wrapped in red and white packaging, are symbolic of the mushroom. In order to be preserved, mushrooms must be dried out. And in order to do this, the shamans would allegedly place them in the branches of trees, and thus we also have the predecessor to the Christmas ornament. The next most significant connection to Siberian shamanism is to be found in the concept of Santa's reindeer. Siberian peoples were known to have domesticated reindeer and used them for travel by pulling sleds. If the shamans indeed undertook yearly missions of fungal gifting, they would have certainly used reindeer sleds in making their rounds. Furthermore, reindeer were considered to be animals of great spiritual power. In 1821, publisher William Gray printed the first work to feature Santa's magic reindeer, the author of which remained anonymous. In an interview, Gilly stated, quote, "Dear Sir, the idea of Santa Claus was not mine, nor was the idea of a reindeer. The author of the tale but submitted the piece, and with little added information. However, it should be noted that he did mention the reindeer in a subsequent correspondence. He stated that in the far north, near the Arctic lands, a series of animals exist. These hooven and antlered animals resemble the reindeer, and are feared and honored by those around. As, you see, he claims to have heard they could fly from his mother being an Indian of the area." As part of this mushroom Santa theory, the magical aspects of Santa Claus are often attributed to the hallucinogenic properties of the Amanita muscaria, in that they were inspired by visions people had while under its influence. One proposed narrative is that as onlookers, who were tripping on shrooms, saw the shaman riding past, he and his reindeer might have appeared to be flying. The reindeer were also known to have a taste for the mushroom themselves, so flying reindeer could refer to these animals' intoxication. Perhaps a more elegant explanation can be found in considering this as representative of the shamanic soul flight we explored in the shaman episode. Of course, no analysis of Santa Claus would be complete without discussing his elves. As we learned previously, an integral component of Siberian shamanism was the use of spirit helpers. Here we could make a connection to the idea that Santa relied on the aid of his elvish artificers. Furthermore, the association between elves, fairies, and mushrooms is well established in folklore. It seems that in this case, the psychedelic visions may have indeed served as the inspiration for the legend. Ethnobotanist and lecturer Terence McKenna, who advocated the use of psychedelic plants, often spoke of entities encountered during psychedelic experiences, which he termed the machine elves. Encountering these beings is a remarkable phenomenon that is experienced almost universally among people who have psychedelic experiences. Studies and surveys are now being conducted which show recurring religious supernatural archetypes which manifest in altered states of consciousness. Often these experiencers have no foreknowledge of the subject matter of their visions, and their contents are relatively uniform despite differences in personal and cultural background. These facets of the psychedelic experience have startling ontological implications. As we know that the Siberian shamanic traditions likely had an influence on the spiritual practices and beliefs in Northern Europe, it seems entirely possible that some of these elements could have merged with the proto-Santa Sinterklaas beliefs found in the Netherlands and surrounding areas. The strongest European link to Siberian shamanism, as we have learned, is to be found in Scandinavia, and Nordic mythology is generally accepted as a significant source of Santa Claus folklore. We also know that the Scandinavians used the Amanita muscaria within a religious context as well. A final and obvious connection to be made is the idea that Santa lives in the North Pole, which resembles the cold Arctic climate and northern geography of Siberia. Historian Ronald Hutton refutes the mushroom Santa theory, citing the lack of evidence of the Amanita muscaria actually having been used by the Siberian shamans. It is true that psychedelics were used sparingly, and that most shamans endeavored to be able to enter trance without relying on them. Many Siberian shamans have related to ethnographers that they were too powerful to need the mushroom to tap into the spirit world. This, however, does not necessarily debunk the theory, which posits that the mushrooms were given out to ordinary people by the shamans so that people without shamanic ability could have visionary experiences that were normally inaccessible to them. As these types of experiences were highly valued in shamanic cultures for their ability to provide deep insight, essential for the survival and well-being of the community, it seems well within reason to suggest that this would have been seen as an important shared religious rite that bound the people together during an important time of the year. As the sun halts its procession during the winter solstice, in between the old year and the new, this period was considered a liminal time when the veil between worlds was thin, similar to Samhain, after which the sun, resuming its motion for the new year, was then associated with rebirth. Those who take heavy doses of psychedelics often report feeling a sense of spiritual rebirth as a result of the experience, so it makes sense that such a rite would be undertaken during this time of year. At the very least, smaller doses of Amanita muscaria could have been a prescription for seasonal depression, as it is known to function as a mood elevator. As spiritual healers, providing this relief would sensibly fall within the purview of the shaman's responsibilities. Mushrooms aside, let us now take a look at some of the tie-ins between Santa Claus lore, paganism, and folk beliefs. In looking at the names of reindeer, Donner and Blitzen are derived from the Dutch words for thunder and lightning. It was said that Thor, the god of thunder, traveled through the sky on a great chariot pulled by two magical goats. In Germany, Thor himself was referred to as Donner. The idea of Santa descending through a chimney also has some interesting precedents within European folklore. This folklore often features fairies of various kinds entering homes through chimneys. Many different supernatural beings were believed to use chimneys to access the human world, for good or for ill. An interesting variation of the Santa Claus archetype is the good Italian witch, La Befana, who came down the chimney to leave presents in people's shoes, which were set near the fireplace. The belief in chimneys as an access point for the supernatural later became reinforced by Christianity. Quote, during the 15th century, the French scholar Petrus Mamoris became concerned about a widespread belief that witches could pass through solid objects, like walls and closed doors, in order to enter homes. Believing Christians were granting too much power to the occult, Mamoris offered a practical explanation. Witches, elves, and the like simply entered via the chimney. His idea gained widespread cultural currency. Here, the passing through the chimney is reduced to a physical rationale, as it is a literal opening to the home. The significance of the chimney, however, appears to run much deeper. Author Holly Tucker explains, quote, the fairy's descent through the chimney is highly symbolic. The hearth represents family, and smoke the life, the respiration of its members. While it is a signifier for the closed family space, The chimney is also understood in folklore to have a mediating function. It links the earthly world with the spirit world and was understood to be a portal for witches on their way to Sabbath ceremonies. Moreover, the witch fairy's penetration of the enclosed family space through the chimney is not unlike that of the child's passage through the birth canal. The chimney is a microcosmic version of the axis mundi, the connection between the heavens and the earth, and so in essence was a liminal space. Recall in the Christmas episode the concept of the sacred fire, which was kept burning throughout the sun's transition during the winter solstice, invoking the eternal power of divinity at the juncture between worlds. In this sense, we can think of Santa's gifts as representing the gift of the renewal of life. Among all possible sources, many elements of Santa Claus seem to draw significantly from fairy folklore. This is notably evident in the idea of gifting. As we previously learned in the first 3 episodes, there is a rich tradition of fairy gifting, where humans would make offerings to the fairies and vice versa. These offerings could be made for appeasement or, in the case of house fairies, such as the brownie, for services rendered. We can see an obvious vestige of this tradition in the custom of leaving milk and cookies for Santa Claus, and add to this the fact that milk and sweets were often favored by the fairies. Of the many different fairy-like beings, of particular interest in this case is the Scandinavian Nis, or Tomte, the belief in whom appears to have been prevalent in the 17th century. The Nis was said to take an appearance similar to a garden gnome, a small elderly man with a long white beard, donning a red cap, woolen tunic, and stockings. In fact, in the original poem by Moore, Santa is described as a jolly old elf who was small in stature. The Nis is even described as having a certain sheen to its eyes, which is also described in the poem by Moore. The Nis traveled from home to home with his animal, known as the Yule Goat, knocking on people's doors and handing out gifts. The Nis was also associated with the fly agaric mushroom, and was even said to bestow them as gifts. Recall that a prominent feature of the fairy temperament was judgment, and sometimes harsh punishment, handed out to offending humans. The Nis was no exception to this. Aside from the obvious similarities in appearance, it seems the idea of Santa Claus passing judgment on children, determining whether they are naughty or nice, rewarding or punishing them accordingly, bear a remarkable similarity to this aspect of fairy folklore. In the older European Santa Claus traditions of the Alpine regions, this connection is more apparent, as naughty children were in store for far worse than a lump of coal. In many of these versions of the legend, Santa is accompanied by a dark counterpart, whose job it was to deal with unruly children. The most notorious incarnation of this was Krampus, the horned Christmas devil who kidnapped the misbehaved and beat them with birch rods. A final consideration is the possible connection between Santa Claus and the Greco-Roman god Kronos, or Saturn, and his corresponding planetary body. Esoteric author Manly P. Hall, a proponent of astrotheology, described a key interaction as the sun passes through the astrological house of Saturn, Capricorn, during the winter solstice. He writes, "Having been struck by Libra, the state, Scorpio, the church, and Sagittarius, the mob, the sun is secretly born through the darkness by the signs of Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces, and buried over the brow of a hill, the vernal equinox. Capricorn has for its symbol an old man with a scythe in his hand. This is Father Time, the wayfarer. Saturn, the old man who lives at the North Pole and brings with him to the children of men a sprig of evergreen, the Christmas tree, is familiar to the little folks under the name of Santa Claus, for he brings each winter the gift of a new year. In the Christmas episode, we explored how Saturn was associated with limitations and endings. However, as a god of the harvest, he also appears to represent new life, generation, and fruition. Therefore, he is a fitting representation of the winter solstice, which contains both death and life. His positive aspect may well be Santa, while his negative aspect is represented in Santa's dark counterpart. As we can see, the legend of Santa Claus is complex and may owe its existence to many disparate pre-existing beliefs, yet all of which are unified thematically in the spirit of the winter solstice. Whether in the form of a mushroom, a saint, a shaman, an elf, or a planet, he undoubtedly represents joy, compassion, and the promise of divine renewal and communion. I wish you all a most happy holiday. Merry Christmas, Good Yule, and Eo Saturnalia.
The letters, you and Mom got me to write them every year at Christmas. I'm sending one off tomorrow again.
The Santa Claus, Rick?
Yeah, the big guy.
The big guy? The big guy, that's God, Ricky.
Yeah, God. That's what I said, Santa.
Ricky, you know Santa and God aren't the same guy, right?
Dad, you didn't know that? I mean, think about it. How would he get around the world in one night? Of course the same person, right, Bubs?
No, Ricky. Santa and God, that's two different things.